The session before lunch. Can you make it? Yes, you can. It will be fast-paced enough so that you'll be kept awake. It is by myself and William E. Brumback, State of the Plants, Conservation Challenges and Opportunities, and you'll be happy to know that Brett Trowbridge is going to be keeping me on time. So there's always retaliation. I may step away from the podium. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, so I'm in touch with my inner diva. Here we go. So I'm going to talk a little bit about a recent report that has been released by the New England Wildflower Society. There are two versions of it. One is a 10-page glossy. The other is a 77-page peer-reviewed document that was written by yours truly with 303 references. You might be wondering, why do we need yet another environmental report? All of us probably in our mailboxes get these various updates on the state of the birds or losing ground and the status of pollinators in North America and climate change, and it's just one long soap opera. And so, you might be wondering why New England Wildflower Society thought it would be necessary to release a report. What we really essentially wanted to do was to bring attention to the fact that the basis of all these pollinators, the birds, the habitats, are in fact plants. And in our 115th year, we thought that this would be an appropriate time to pull together a lot of the information that New England Wildflower Society has gathered over time. And I think no slide better exemplifies the fact that plants are the basis of the habitats and actually physically holding them together than a sand dune. And yet, we don't always recognize that. I'm sure that these kids are trying to key out the tree that bird is but possibly not. Plant blindness is a disease. It is curable. Many of us do recognize this. And we did, as part of the report, want to call attention to the importance of educating the next generation, really engaging, getting people outside. You don't have to know what the plants are necessarily, but just recognize that they're there. And you guys don't need to be told all of the amazing ecosystem services that plants provide. We all know that they are quietly soaking up all the hot air that I am spewing at this point, drawing down carbon, cleaning the atmosphere, mitigating floods, as Christian mentioned, and protecting water quality, etc. So the purpose of the report is basically to look across the entire New England flora and document status and trends in that flora. So not just rare species, but also common species and prevalent habitats. Identify what are some of the major threats to plants in the region and to particular habitats. So some threats are unique to particular habitats, others are overarching and have regional impacts, such as climate change. Because we're research wonks, we wanted to identify what we don't know. Right? We have a great deal of data, but we need more research, even just basic research, on the life histories and ecology of many of these species. We want to develop a framework and really begin a national conversation about managing and conserving plant species, not just in New England, but throughout the country. We wanted this report to begin to serve as a model for that. And in fact, we are already initiating conversations with folks in New York and California, etc., about what can we do in common that will help preserve floral diversity. And then most importantly, we didn't want to just give you the data and say, good, there it is. We want to make cogent suggestions for what each person can do at an individual level, at a community level, and at the national level to really encourage plant conservation. So we have a number of different sources of data gathered by New England Wildflower Society and its many institutional partners. We work with the New England Plant Conservation Program. That's over 60 organizations that we collaborate with and coordinate monitoring and management actions and regional strategies for plant conservation. We have our astounding plant conservation volunteers, which I'll mention a little bit more about. Over 750 have been trained to recognize rare species throughout New England and monitor them. 200 active every year. The Riparian Recovery Project, directed by Arthur Haynes, looked at over 18,000 specimens of rare plants cataloged in the herbaria across New England. We have, of course, the Flora Novae Anglii. I'm sure you all own a copy. It makes great bedtime reading. It's wonderful. And it is the definitive tome. We've heard it mentioned in a great many talks today. We have Go Botany and PlantShare. PlantShare in particular offers a way for citizen scientists to contribute sightings of plants and really contribute to our overall emerging understanding of the distribution of plants. And thousands, of course, of research, published studies. New England has a tremendously rich academic history of botanical research and many, many experts. I'll also just mention very briefly the Flora Conservanda. This was published first in 1996 in the August journal Rhodora, my personal favorite, and updated again in 2012, bringing together natural heritage programs from all 6 New England states to assess the status of plants that are listed in one or more New England states as endangered, threatened, special concern, or historic. And also to develop a sense of which plant species, if they are not necessarily listed yet or throughout most of their range, are in fact declining. So these are sort of the canaries in the coal mine. So what are the data? General findings. As of today, at approximately 9:55 a.m., we have 3,514 species. I'm sure a few more have snuck in the intervening hours. The majority of them across New England are native, but 22% of those of our native species are in fact rare. So over a fifth of our native flora are considered rare in one or more New England states. Of the 31% that are non-native, we consider about 10% of those as invasive, so that's about 111 species that we are keeping our eyes on. By mapping occurrences of rare plants, and this is an analysis for 70 species of rare plants that I put together a number of years ago, we can code the town boundaries. These are town boundaries for all of New England. We can code them in terms of the numbers of known occurrences of these rare species, and by doing so, identify hotspots of rare plant diversity in New England. As we might expect, the White Mountains, you get a number of very limited alpine species there, the St. John River Valley, our own wonderful Connecticut River Valley in which we are sitting, Cape Cod and the islands, the Marble Belt of western Vermont, Massachusetts, and Connecticut. Now, just because a town here is white does not mean that there aren't rare plant species there. It means that we may need to be doing more sampling. But the patterns that many botanists know in New England really do pop out. We have 10 taxa that are actually endemic to New England, known only from New England states, not occurring outside of the region. And of those, 3 are now extinct. You'll be heartbroken to know that one of them is a crabgrass, one of them is a hawthorn, and one of them is a milkvetch. Milkvetch! But you know, some of the reasons for their disappearance, you know, trampling in the case of this crabgrass, Robin's milkvetch, dammed and flooded. So these are, you know, emblematic of some of the factors that have been discussed today that contribute to species extinction. We do have one species that, together with New England Wildflower Society, the Appalachian Mountain Club, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, has now been removed from the U.S. Endangered Species List, the only plant to date that has. Robin's cinquefoil, this one known from Mount Washington and Franconia, so we've restored populations there. Now I'm talking about New England today, but it's important to realize that plants that are rare in New England are rare throughout a significant portion of the rest of their range. This is one of my favorites, purple milkweed, and we see in New England, you know, lots of red and orange, warning colors, but in fact, on average, these species are listed in almost 40% of the rest of their range, so that if we can figure out how to conserve and manage them in New England, we may be able to help manage them throughout their entire range. Just a few statistics from the new Flora Conservanda 2012. We're able to compare that to the number of species, the distribution of species in the 1996 Flora Conservanda. So that enables us to to get a sense of whether most of the species are staying the same, they're maintaining their level of rarity, but we do note that 25 have actually been downlisted. So we've moved them from a category of globally rare to regionally rare, or from regionally rare to secure, or things like that. We do have 8 that have been uplisted, and I just want to draw your attention to the fact that 100 of them are now regarded as historic in New England. We have lost them from our flora. They may exist elsewhere, but they are no longer here, and that's a pretty significant number. This is going to sound familiar from Robert Burton's talk and others that you will probably hear today. Looking across all of New England, the percentage of species in a given family that are listed as rare for the Ophioglossaceae, 60%. So the moonworts are suffering. It may be due to, as we pointed out earlier, invasive earthworms altering soil processes. They depend heavily on mycorrhizae. Saxifrages, many of these associated with colder habitats, a significant portion declining. Members of the Orobanchaceae, the louseworts, which have complex lifestyles. This is Furbish's lousewort, the emblematic plant of New England, that depend on host plant associations. So trying to manage and conserve these is kind of a challenge, and many of them associated with very changeable river habitats. The most charismatic, arguably, members of our flora, personally I think the ferns are the most charismatic, but whatever. Orchids, many declining, and many of what we consider to be commoner orchids, even pink lady slippers, are on the decline. So these are things that we need to watch for. When we look at the proportion of species that have declined in 2012 from 1996, so again comparing the flora conservanda, we note that a disproportionate number of those species are insect pollinated. So we have a large proportion of the declining species being insect pollinated as opposed to not declining species relative to wind or self-pollinated plants. And we're hearing a lot about declines in pollinators, colony collapse disorder, monarch butterflies, and we're beginning to pick up that signal in plants themselves. So what we did, instead of issuing a 3,500-page report, which would kill everyone, we decided to focus on 5 major habitat types that encompass a number of the rare plant species we're caring about and many of the common species that are dominant in New England. So these habitat types literally reach from the mountains to the sea, the alpine to the coastal. We talked about not just the plants, but the animals, the services to humans, and not just focused on rare plants, but the common ones. So we assessed the threats to each habitat, identified some of the most threatened habitats, and the steps needed to conserve and restore those habitats. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail about each of these. You can read the report. It is online at newenglandwild.org. But many of these you will be familiar with. 48 rare species, 4 of which are globally rare in the Alpine. Some of the major threats to the Alpine that we're keeping an eye on. Obviously, trampling is a big one. These are popular destinations. Climate change, so especially climate warming. We are beginning in certain Alpine habitats to begin to see more tall woody species, shrub species, and tree species moving into those. Mixed northern hardwoods forests, the emblematic forests of New England, with some economically important plants, 5 globally rare species. Obviously, our forests have been modified and manipulated very dramatically since colonial settlements, and we're seeing that even though forests have recovered to about 70% cover, that the understories are heavily depauperate. Riparian habitats, we just heard about this. Here's our robin's milk vetch, known for 3 populations along the Connecticut River. 9 globally rare species. Damming is a big deal. We have 10,250 dams in New England, and we lead the nation in taking out 100 of them. So we're getting there. Sandplain grasslands, think Cape Cod, also some very important interior sandplain grasslands, Montague sandplains, Waterboro Shapely Barrens, incredible hotspots for insect diversity. Hundreds of insects depend on these habitats, including the federally endangered Carner blue butterfly. These need fire. They are missing that disturbance factor that maintains them as open and early successional. Perhaps, arguably, our most imperiled habitat is salt marsh. 80% of salt marshes on Cape Cod are suffering from salt marsh dieback, a very complex ecological phenomenon that is only being really teased apart at this point. They are also, of course, threatened by climate change. So, in conclusion, our recommendations, okay, the basic overall goal is something I'm thinking everybody in this room would like to do or foster, is functioning ecosystems that have species in them that are resilient, that are able to evolve, to respond to changing climate and all sorts of other stressors with as little intervention or input and gardening on our part as possible. So what you can do, plant native plants. You probably already do that. Try not to use a huge amount of herbicides and pesticides on your lawn. Educate yourself and your kids. Use Go Botany, to appreciate plants, get outside, remove invasives, learn how to recognize them and prevent new invasions. Kudzu is now known from Massachusetts. And support your local land trust. These are all very simple steps we can take. At the community level, the Society is developing some of the first online courses in basic botany, field botany, and native plant horticulture and design, designed for municipal officials. DPW, DOT, planning board members, conservation commissioners who are making large-scale decisions about planting on the landscape. Advocating for more plant education in the school, working with the local outlets to really promote sales of native plants, and encouraging agriculture, sustainable agriculture and forestry. At the national level, we need to advocate very strongly, both as organizations and individuals, to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. There's just no question about it. If we do not tackle climate change, New Hampshire will have the climate of North Carolina by 2070, and that's within your kid's lifetime. Advocating for funding for land protection and management, strengthening laws that protect wetlands, and getting around closing some of these loopholes. So I'm happy to take, I think we have a few minutes for questions if you have any questions. Thank you. Yeah.
You talk about deer hunting, advocacy of having more deer hunters.
We discussed that, yes, we discussed that at length actually in the report, talking about reforming the models for deer population growth and really looking hard at the regulations around hunting. Also looking at some out-of-date laws such as the Lacey Act, which prevent actual use of venison for commercial, for food. If you have venison in a restaurant in the United States, it's coming from New Zealand. Go figure. So we definitely discussed deer at length, and they are, a pretty major threat across many of these habitats. There's no venison for lunch, don't worry. Any other questions? Hey. Sorry. Hi. Yo, yes.
This is a comment, not a question, sorry, but I'm glad that you at least touched on it a little bit. There was recently a Wired article whose ominous title was, "You're worried about the wrong pollinators?" And in keeping with that, my lab and others have demonstrated that in Maine at least, up to 70% of the native bee taxa are declining or disappearing.
Oh yeah.
And you cannot protect plants that need insect pollinators if there are no pollinators to pollinate them. So the biggest issues in Maine are things like reforestation. There's just nothing for them to eat or places for them to live. So if you're trying to save plants and you're interested and you're motivated, please also consider the pollinators who maybe you're not thinking of, because plants and the pollinators need each other.
Absolutely, and we do talk about that in the report. One of the points that we make, particularly with the press, is that if you do start planting native plants, that if everybody in this room planted one native plant, we'd have a major habitat restoration project for pollinators and for birds going on.
And think diet all the way through the year. That's another thing, is that if all of your plants flower at one time, there's nothing for those bees to eat the entire rest of the year.
That's for sure. Okay, go to lunch. It's on the terrace. You'll see signs.